That's great. Ready?
Yes, ma'am. I am.
I haven't seen you in the mansion in a long time. What's going on?
This guy, let me tell you about this guy. This guy made me a Jew. I was always a Jew. Reminded me I was a Jew. My son is a hippie musician now. Yeah, amazing.
Hine matohu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matohu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matohu shevet achim gam yachad. shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matohu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matohu manayim shevet achim gam yachad.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
My name is Liz Sherman. I'm not sure I know all of you, but I know a lot of you. And I'm one of the vice presidents here at Shaaray Tefila. And I've been part of this community since I was 8 years old. So it seems kind of fitting. Yeah, as Rabbi Mosbacher said, only about 10 years ago. But anyway, it seems kind of fitting for me to be the one to introduce this program, which is a panel discussion between our Rabbi Mosbacher and Shaaray's 3 previous rabbis, Harvey Tattelbaum, Jonathan Stein, and Deborah Hirsch. See, I didn't even say anything about you yet, and they're clapping. They'll be discussing Shaaray Tefila's past and future role in American Jewish life. But before I introduce the program, I want to recognize the congregants who prepared the program and greeted you as you arrived. Karen Easton Schiff, Marla Gamron, Hal Gutstein, Jane Herman, Penny Landisi, Sandra Lehman, and Alan Pottisman, and Ellen Vanacore. And also our dedicated staff that helped put this whole event together, including Amy Schwach, and Chip Schrager, and our maintenance team. Thank you to all of you for your help. So over the last 46 years since Rabbi Tattelbaum became our senior rabbi, Shaaray Tefila has changed in many ways. And yet, its distinct character remains the same. It is a warm, supportive community which values its past but is determined to stay current. Through their tenure, each of our rabbis has been careful to guide this congregation through exhilarating and challenging times without losing sight of who we are. They are an important part of why Rabbi Rick Jacobs described Shaaray Tefila as a congregation that is going places. Shaaray Tefila is lucky to have had these 4 rabbis as its leaders. Their biographies are in your program, and I encourage you to read them at your leisure. Each has played an important role within the Reform movement. Personally, I have been very lucky to get to know all 4 rabbis and share happy moments with them, from my wedding right here in 1978. Oops, that's more than 10 years ago. To my children's weddings, and to my grandson's bris just last fall. They are all extraordinary individuals, and I hope you'll enjoy the upcoming discussion as much as I know I will. No beam, it makes it harder. Before I turn the program over to Rabbi Mosbacher, I have one housekeeping matter. If you have any questions that you would like to address to the panel today, please complete the card which was inserted into your program and pass it to one of the ushers who will collect it and bring it up to Rabbi Mosbacher. So thanks again for being here, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. And can we give a round of applause to Liz Sherman for putting this program together? Welcome to all of you, and welcome to my colleagues. It is a great privilege to be here with the three of you. We're going to try and use these mics. If you can't hear, we do have this other microphone that we can try and use. So I know you'll let us know if you can't hear. It's a pleasure to be here with my teachers and my colleagues. Rabbis Tattelbaum, Stein, and Hirsch have been so incredibly helpful and kind to me during this year of transition. I'm so grateful that they've made time to be with us this weekend. Thinking about last night, as people came to me to talk to me about the power of the evening, more people commented on how important it was to have you with us than any other aspect of the evening. So I'm grateful that you made the time, the journey, the effort, and the commitment to be here with us. It's an amazing thought that the four of us represent half of the senior rabbis Shaaray Tefila has ever had in its 170-year history. But we know as we sit here today that we're sitting ourselves on the shoulders of the rabbis who came before us, Rabbi Bamberger, Rabbi Stern, Rabbi Isaacs, or as it says on his picture, Reverend Isaacs, and Dr. De Sola Mendez. We know that their spirits made this congregation what it was even before we came here, and we know that their spirits are with us still. So we hope that you will write down questions. I have a series of questions that I'll ask my colleagues, and invite you to write down questions as well. Remember, the goal is to elicit the history and the opinions of my colleagues, not to try and stump them. So if you want to ask them what page of the Bible a certain thing was, you should ask them afterwards. And
I'll yield to my senior colleague.
Okay, all right. And then we'll end our time here with Havdalah. And because you haven't eaten in a while, we'll then go next door and enjoy some more food. If you haven't had a chance to turn off your cell phone, I'd ask you to do that so we can make the most of this time together. So I'm going to throw out some questions, and you can answer them in any order you want, and you can pass if you don't want to answer. If you want to plead the fifth or anything else, you certainly could do that. But I would love to know what each of you consider to be the moment in which you took most pride in your rabbinate here at Shaaray Tefila. So for this one, can I start with you?
Okay. You're looking back on a period of life that was 33 years. That was my tenure here at Temple Shaaray Tefila. And so, pardon?
Take the mic, Harvey.
33 years. Among so many different things, we put up the fourth floor of the Ostreicher building. We saw to a new air conditioning mode for the whole temple. And I remember that for one Rosh Hashanah, it was completed just before the second blowing of the shofar. I'm very proud of the fact that so many of you, I don't know if you're all here today, came with Merrill and me to Israel for our 15-day tour. We led 18 of them.
How many people here were on a trip with Rabbi Tattelbaum? Good, a few of you. Excellent.
Where are the others? And those were the years that the country was struggling with Vietnam. Those were the years that Israel was, as she still is, surrounded by great difficulty on every side. 18 tours to Israel from Upper East Side of New York City meant that about 600 people went, and there were about 75 ceremonies of bar and bat mitzvah. And I loved them. I loved the fact that we did it and that we had such a good time doing it. And we had a great travel agent in those days who helped us revamp the schedule, the itinerary every year with different things so that we wouldn't get bored with just seeing the same things. From meeting with members of Knesset, of the parliament, to concerts in the Upper Galilee on, I forget the name of the mountain, but with a concert pianist who had his piano there because a battalion of IDF, Israel Defense Force soldiers, were promised a concert if they could bring the piano up that mountain and up to his second story of his house. And it was a wonderful experience. We could see Miyam Liam from the Sea of Galilee to the Mediterranean Sea from his porches. And that was just one of the highlights. Another thing that was very important to me and it seemed to catch on the imagination and the doing of many people in the congregation was the Soviet Jewry issue. I think we stomped and marched all over this city. And I was amazed how many people would come out on a Sunday morning or even a weekday down to the UN and all around the city to do what we could to get those Jews out of there. It was an amazingly crazy suggestion. When just before the Soviet Jewry movement started, a colleague of mine who really put it into motion said, "We're going to get 2 million Jews out." And we said he was crazy, but he wasn't. Thousands, hundreds of thousands came here to Brooklyn and some came to the congregation, as a matter of fact, and of course to Israel. And I was very proud of the fact that the congregation seemed to respond to something that was very important to me that came from deep within my soul, and that was Yisrael, the meaning of Yisrael, wrestling with God. We're all children of the Holocaust. We all know the horrible insanity that murdered so many of our people. 1 million children under the age of 14. We can never forgive it. And because of this, we had argumentation with God, which is a lovely old Jewish scholastic tradition to argue with God.
So I'm going to ask you, we want to hear more. Can we ask Rabbi Stein to share one of your proudest moments as a leader?
One.
Yeah, wow. I can try.
My biggest challenge, not proudest moment, my biggest challenge was that when I succeeded Rabbi Tattelbaum, I inherited a healthy and vibrant and growing congregation, and I had a job to do. And my job was not to break it. And I took that seriously. I didn't want to break apart a congregation that seemed to have some unity. Rabbi Tattelbaum had told me that I ought to be careful about getting involved in the community because the congregation itself was so consuming. And he was right. But being able to maintain that continuity by not breaking the place, I think actually was one of my best accomplishments. Second, I would say that I'm very proud of the way that we shifted worship over the terms of my tenure. And I made an attempt to try to let the change bubble up from the bottom rather than come from me. But I listened very carefully, and the moment one of you said, "Why don't we do X?" and I'd been thinking about that, I would jump on it. And I would say, "I need your help getting that done." So I tried to do the change from within. But having said that, worship, I think, changed significantly, but slowly over those years. And two last things I'm proud of. One, we upped the ante for bar and bat mitzvah participation on the bima. We upped the ante, meaning students learning more Torah more Haftorah, more Hebrew. That was not fast or easy either, but I believe it paid big dividends. And finally, I am proud of playing a part in the creation of the new post-bar and bat mitzvah program called Pathways. I believe that we created a mechanism that could keep kids more engaged in the future, and that we could, by changing our idea that the goal is not confirmation, the goal is connection. Confirmation was another way off the bus. That's all it was. When I fought to raise it from 9th grade to 10th grade, you thought all hell broke loose. Confirmation is outdated. Kids don't care about it. Our goal should not be to get them to 10th grade. Our goal should be to instill in them a way to be part of the Jewish community every day. So that post-bar and bat mitzvah program is very important to me, and I hope it'll pay future dividends.
Absolutely. Wonderful.
So my tenure is slightly shorter than Rabbi Tattelbaum's. I think my proudest moment was last night. I think it was being able to be here and to see the genuine love and support that came from this congregation onto the Bima. And as an interim, which was, as we know, my last 2 years here, one of the challenges is to maintain that community and to hold the congregation in a way that you can try things, you can try on new things, you can take some things off, but ultimately you want the community to remain a community. And that the thread that goes between the rabbis before us and the ones that will come after Rabbi Mosbacher and many decades from now, it's you. It's the congregation, whether it's Liz, who's been here since she was 8, whether it's people who've just joined the temple and know not either one of us up here, and yet they will create their own history and their own sense of story that will become part of the fabric of this congregation. If there is one piece that I could point to in terms of the 2 years that I did serve here in that position, it's probably the implementation of Mishkan HaNefesh. I mean, it took a risk during an interim period to say, let's put in a new prayer book. We had piloted it under Rabbi Stein's time, but to say, let's put it into the sanctuary and to just do it. And Cantor Kipnis and I spent, I think it was about 40 hours putting that service together to make certain that it was seamless, and I know that it enhanced the worship experience, and that was important.
So hold on to the microphone for a second, if you wouldn't mind. Dan Walter asks, the 5th question, why is this synagogue different from all other synagogues? It's well asked, and it's a really important question for us to ask. How do we differentiate how do you see Shaaray Tefila in a competitive market, shall we say, on the Upper East Side? What makes Shaaray Tefila distinct and unique?
Is Diana an appropriate response? I think from my perspective, there is a unique quality, and I'm going to tack this on to Rabbi Tattelbaum. The word has come up many times, the notion of it being a Hamish congregation, a congregation that really has a soul. It's not corporate. It hasn't been run in a corporate way, for better or for worse, but that's not who this congregation is. And I think that one of the qualities that is kind of unique is that there really is a sense of participation. It's not a top-down congregation. There are committees and there are congregations that have dismantled committees saying that they've also gone the way of goodbye, as confirmation has in many congregations. But there is a core grassroots piece here that I think that as we move forward in our country and in our city, that notion of grassroots pulling together and people finding their niche and making a large congregation a smaller congregation is really critical. So I think that that Hamish nature reflects the soul of this congregation.
Excellent.
I never said this to Rabbi Tattelbaum, but I think that consciously or not, during his tenure, he positioned the congregation as the traditional congregation in this area that is Reform. And honestly, except for Musaf, we could be like Park Avenue. That's the second time they do the service on Shabbat. You know how you go to conservative, you think it's over and it's not? That's called Musaf, the additional service. And when I think about the other synagogues in the area, what the competition is, the idea that we were on the traditional side of the Reform movement was very important to me for coming here. I was raised as a conservative Jew. First time I set foot in a Reform congregation in 1963, I just couldn't stand it. It wasn't what I was used to. Anyway, and that history, of course, comes from the fact that we were an Orthodox synagogue in our origins. 1845, we didn't join the Reform movement until 1921.
So Roz Lasker had asked, why and when did Shaaray Tefila change from an Orthodox to a Reform congregation?
Samuel Isaacs, the first rabbi, who, by the way, published a for-profit newspaper in this city named The Messenger, and whose name is on the plaque of the founders of Mount Sinai Hospital, was an Orthodox rabbi who insisted upon the orthodoxy of this place. His successor, De Sola Mendes, slowly moved the congregation toward a more liberal approach, but always maintained that traditionalism. And I think we still practice some of that, and I think it's part of the identity of the synagogue.
When people ask me what kind of congregation it is, I said it's Reform with a traditional flavor. I wanted to use that word particularly, and I wanted that to be true. I wanted people to know that on Rosh Hashanah there was a Tashlich service. I remember when a few of the members of the board helped me introduce that as part of our Rosh Hashanah observance. There were others on the board who said, oh, Tashlich will be Shlogan Kaparis next. That's that. You see in some Orthodox synagogues the slaughtering of chickens. Forget it. Forget it. But
I don't know if that's going to happen here. No, still not.
But
we'll bring that up at the worship committee and see what they think.
They quieted their mouths when hundreds of people showed up at the corner of 79th and 2nd, and we walked along 79th Street all the way up to the John Finley Walk, that is the esplanade closest to us, and we had a service. And I remember blowing the shofar, and one of the tugboats on the river answered. And it was so eye-catching that before we got up the stairs, we had it downstairs one time rather than up above. The drivers driving north on the East River Drive, there were about 3 or 4 accidents where they hit each other. Fortunately, no fatalities, but we distracted them terribly from their driving duties. And then what happened? Somehow the ABC television and NBC television and certainly Channel 1 that tunes into everybody started looking for us. They wanted a Rosh Hashanah piece, so to speak, in their holiday telecasts. And year after year they would come and people would say, oh, who's going to televise us now? And we, among my colleagues, I got the name the Tashlich King. I don't know whether that was good or bad, but that was one of the innovations that kind of carried through some of that traditional thread, which I wanted always to include as when people ask me what kind of congregation. Reform congregation with a traditional flavor.
So Nancy Schneider asks you specifically.
Where is she?
Where's Nancy?
Oh, there she is.
There she is. what was the most significant change in the congregation that you saw in your time as senior rabbi?
Interesting question, because yes, I was preceded by some giants, and Rabbi Bamberger certainly was one of them. He didn't want an assistant, but they forced me on him. And when I became the rabbi, we had a wonderful relationship. I brought many things in that he didn't like, some traditional elements that he wasn't used to. And he represented a certain portion of the congregation that was out of the old German Jewish background. And more Hebrew, more singing, more on Simchat Torah, for instance. They had never carried the Torah around. Well, the change that I brought in was that we carried all the Torahs around, and we carried them out into the street. So they saw changes, and many of them simply bore it because they weren't that happy with it, and they couldn't say anything because the congregation started to grow by leaps and bounds. And I think that was due to the, quotes, traditional flavor that I think we emphasized.
That's right. Rabbi Stein, if I could ask you, I have to tell you that so many people have talked about the aftermath of September 11, 2001, and the role that this congregation played in helping them through that time. So the question from Jane Herman, I don't know if this will be, if it's specifically September 11th, but I wanted to just name that. Jane Herman asks, what was the biggest change in the country or the world during your years at Shaaray Tefila, and how were those changes reflected in the congregation, in worship, and congregational life?
I don't think there's any question but that September 11th's events were the most crucial event of my rabbinate here, and I know that you remember that it gave me, I was the unexpected, unwitting beneficiary of 9/11. I know that doesn't sound good, but I got here on the Bima the following night, and after it was over, the congregation who didn't know me said, "Oh, you can really do something. You have some experience." So I got the advantage, if you will, of being able to shepherd the congregation through that moment and into the High Holy Days, because Rosh Hashanah was just a few days afterwards. But I do want to make sure that the history is told correctly. And what I mean by that is this. On 9/11, we learned that there was at least one family in the synagogue that thought they had lost somebody. We didn't know anything else. We just knew that one. And Rabbi Korngold and I tried to tend to that family on the 11th. On the 12th, Rabbi Korngold, alav shalom, came into my study about 8:30, and he said, "We need to do two things. We need to have a service tonight, and we need to call every member of the congregation and find out if they're okay." These did not come from me. My role was to say, those are the most amazing things that we can do, and we did. But for the sake of history, the real key to our role was Rabbi Korngold's suggestions. And then, of course, Nancy Schneider had 15 people in here within 15 minutes making phone calls, and somehow we accomplished that task. So 9/11 for sure was the biggest moment for me.
Look at it.
Just so you know, this is my new life. Dropping things, knocking into things, knocking things over.
Rabbi Hirsch, the question is, how do we find common ground within our congregation regarding social and political issues without alienating anyone but respecting our differences? Impossible.
Rabbi Tattelbaum just said
That's a
impossible.
one-word answer. Impossible.
You know, it's interesting. I'm currently, as many of you know, I'm down at the Village Temple where the barometer's kind of very tilted in one direction in terms of liberal bent. And I'm very aware that at Shaaray Tefila there really is a spectrum of beliefs and opinions. And I think that there are two issues. One, to remain open to dialogue. Respectful dialogue, I think, is critical. And I think that if we root, and if the congregation roots its thinking, its actions in Jewish values and understands what those values are and can live those values, there's a way of doing it. But I think that it's kind of hard to go between two very different opinions, and if we think about issues out there, it goes from anything domestic as well as to Israel. Clearly the congregation has a clear spectrum of belief on Israel, which is why one of the hardest sermons I gave was my first year in the interim on Israel at the time of the Gaza war. And to be able to acknowledge and recognize that there are two positions and everything in between, and to be able to get people to listen to one another, I think is the most critical key. And as Jews, where we know what happens when we're not listened to and when we're ignored, to open that door for each other isn't always easy, but so very, very necessary.
Thank you. Rabbi Tattelbaum, this question from Woody Greenberg. If you don't know, Rabbi Tattelbaum wrote a volume called Tales of a Village Rabbi, and if you haven't read it, you should. So Woody asks, he says, Tales of a Village Rabbi is purportedly about the village temple, but some of these stories seem to come from Shaaray Tefila. You are not, this is what Woody writes, you are not under oath in this sanctuary, but were some of those stories from this synagogue?
Without question. There's a title and a subtitle to the book, Tales of the Village Rabbi, a Manhattan Chronicle. So the tales kind of followed me as I came up north to become the rabbi of Temple Shaarays. Incidentally, I would like to add a footnote that poor Deborah, this is the second time she's succeeded me because because I had a wonderful experience for 6 years at the Village Temple, and she is now the rabbi of the Village Temple. And if there's anything I can tell you, let me know. An awful lot, a lot of the stories in my book, Tales of the Village Rabbi, really happened up here. But I was the link between the tales downtown and uptown. And I readily admit it. I think some of the more crazy ones happened uptown.
But you changed the names to protect the innocent? Is that what it was?
Yes. All the names in the book are fictitious. Not the stories. The stories are absolutely true. But I did not want to identify, I did not want to be identified, any of the people that were in the stories. Especially the one about the mid-wedding robbery. But I'm not going to talk about it now.
Rabbi Stein, a question from Annette. She asks, what do you think is the best approach to dealing with rising incidents of anti-Semitism in America?
Anti-Semitism scares us. Anti-Semitism arouses our deepest historic fears. Fears that we don't have to face most of our lives in this country. We used to say it was kind of over. When you're fearful, even if you're not personally threatened, you might react out of that fear. I've never found fear to be successful for me. It usually makes me timid, afraid, and if I do react out of it, it's too often impulsive. My fear is that we will react out of fear rather than out of commitment and strength. I think that we have a responsibility to our people and our country to guarantee that anti-Semitism is dealt with in an appropriate way. And I'm not the rabbi who's going to get up and tell you that all hatreds in America are equal. I'm a Jew. I'm not anything else. I've never experienced anything else. That's my concern. I think it has to be confronted. I think it has to be, I'll just tell you one last thing. In San Diego, a member of the congregation out there, about 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago, before they found this kid who was doing the robocall stuff, and it was really hot and heavy, he said to me, "When the time comes, let me know. I'll buy the guns." That's also fear, but I thought it was so telling. Before we knew that it was a Jewish kid who was kind of a little Meshuggah, he'd buy the guns. So I'm not ready to go there, but I think that strength and straight talk, as we heard last night, truth to power. I don't know why Trump gave the speech he gave 3 days ago. I don't care. He said the right words that he hadn't said before. I think because people pounded away at him. So we have to keep doing that.
So there's a number of questions. Perhaps, Rabbi Hirsch, you could help us start, and then anyone else who wants to answer, around how can Michael Starr, Stuart Seldowitz, maybe others have asked questions around how can Shaaray Tefila provide meaning for the next generation of American Jews and be seen as relevant to Jews below the age of 40?
I'm not below 40. I think it's one of the harder questions right now. I think we're living in a world where people are in for what I call drip irrigation consumption.
Drip irrigation
consumption, so that they want what they want where they want it. And to create deep roots, I think, is a really hard thing. Having said that, I think that one of the areas that we see is exploding is the whole area of social media and virtual realities in terms of community. And one of the questions that I have and I'm struggling with is, how do you reach people where they are? And the question I think that's going to be real for all of us is, are synagogues going to be obsolete in 50 years? Or are they going to become more important? One thing that I'm aware of, and this will go on to the political sphere, I think that when the elections happened in November, there was an entire generation that was shocked at what happened, and they were devastated. Whether we agree with their political view or not, there was a devastation that took place in that group 30 and under. And I would hate for history to have to be the reason for the future, but if history teaches us that when there's crisis and people come together, whether it was 9/11, and there was a sense of need for community, I'm sad, but I think it will happen, that there's going to be another time in our world where people are going to return back to religion in a formal way because the answers that they're seeking will not be found in other places.
Any other responses to that question about?
When I was a young colleague, I read an article by another colleague where he titled "The DRF." The DRF. DRF stood for Delayed Religious Factor. And his argument was, stop schreien Gewalt, they'll come. His argument was that religious hibernation is normal. especially at certain life stages, like late high school, college, and early career. Judaism is not our biggest priority. Most of them come back. Doesn't mean we have to be passive or not go out after them. I am less panicked by this because I saw it. They want a Jewish wedding. They want to raise Jewish kids. They won't tell you that at 23, but they will at 35. The delayed religious factor, I think, is a reality of the way that we live. So all our outreach programs, the low dues we set and all that kind of stuff to bring people in, it's fine. But I think maturity and life stage changes many people.
In regard to the DRF that you mentioned so cogently, a member of my congregation downtown was a well-known journalist, and he wrote a smashing article that hit the front lines and especially was on the cover of what was then Look magazine. The Vanishing American Jew, he wrote. Well, within a couple of years, Look magazine vanished. and we continued on. And so I think if we are honest and hardworking and don't relent for a moment in our duties of, especially of compassion and caring behavior, we will never lose our Jewish people, our adults, our kids. Everybody needs a place where they can go and be a Jew and know that there's compassion there, there is caring there, there's caring about the world, there's caring about the local community. And I think we're never bound to be the vanishing Jews. I don't know what happened within the internal factors of Look magazine, but even life is gone.
Who's the most famous person who came to services while you were the rabbi here, whether they were a member or not?
Well, one was Dr. Henry Kissinger. I had taken his course when I was at Harvard, but he didn't remember me from there. And we were burying the mother of the founder of the very, very lovely nursing home in Riverdale. The name escapes me at the moment. Say it. Yes. Say it again. Yes, Reingold. It was the elder Reingold, Mrs. Reingold, and that's a nursing home that's filled with art and all kinds of lovely things. It's at the forefront of what a nursing home can be, beyond just a staying thing for elderly people. And he was very grateful to the founder and owner of that nursing home, and he came here to the service when she died, and I shook his hand. I said, "I loved your course, sir." He said, "I'm sure you did." Another famous person was, I don't remember his name at the moment, but he was the cardinal of the Archdiocese of New York, who was the cardinal when Klinghoffer was assassinated by the PLO on the ship. What was the name of the ship?
Achille
Lauro. And I've been in close contact for years now with the Klinghoffer family, and married both of their daughters, and also buried his wife. We buried his wife at a funeral here at Shaaray Tefila. I said to the board that they would prefer to have it here because they expect a lot of people in the village temple. It was even smaller than it is now, and they begged for the accommodation, and I got it for them. So those were the two famous people. Oh, and then there was that famous Italian actress who was so gorgeous.
Sophia Loren?
No, she was more gorgeous. Yes, Gina Lollobrigida.
Nice.
Right here in the sanctuary.
Did you you sit on a beamer or in the congregation?
I sat on the beamer, but I looked out there. And I remember saying to her, much to my own embarrassment, "Oh my gosh, I've been in love with you for years." She was here because her facial dentist, there are some dentists who do all kinds of facial surgery, was a member of the congregation. His son was bar mitzvah that weekend. And that's why
my God. Oh, my God. Any famous people you want to lift up?
We had absolutely no famous people here. However, it took me 17 months to get one speaker here, and that was Rabbi Tattelbaum.
That's great. What text or subject did you most enjoy teaching in sort of an adult education setting during your tenure? And it might be the same thing, but sort of what subject that you would teach about got the biggest response or turnout with regards to teaching that you did writ large?
I think there are two. I mean, it depends how you just define teach. I think the Nashim Seder is a really wonderful experience here that teaches in a subliminal way that connection piece.
And we were grateful that you came back and led the
my pleasure.
Nashim Seder. Many people I know were there. Yeah,
so,
let's give Rabbi Hirsch a round of applause.
I mean, I think I really loved Torah Talk. I think the Wednesday, here's a plug, the Wednesday noon, raise your hand, those of you who are in Torah Talk. Okay, I think it's just a wonderful way for people, to not only connect to each other, but to really go through a text and to be deliberate in drilling down or dealing with one verse and feeling a sense of accomplishment when you finish a chapter, let alone when you get through all of the prophets. I mean, going through Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah can only be surpassed by Job in terms of its weightiness. So, but there's that real sense of feeling like you've gone through it, you've read it, and you've shared it. So I've enjoyed that.
Torah Talk this Wednesday.
Torah Talk this Wednesday.
Is completing the reading of the entire
Whoa.
Tanakh.
That's great. Are you having a siyum?
And then the next Wednesday, we're having a siyum. So if you're available for lunch, Penny Landisi is coordinating lunch at Ala Turca. Is that what this place is called? And we would love to have you join us. And the Torah Talk folks helped me create a video that's coming out very soon because I asked them what they wanted to do when they were finished. I didn't know if they wanted to move on to another text. They said, we want to start over again. So it's all in English, no previous experience required. And we will make more room at the table. We'd love to have you join us Wednesdays, 12:30 to 1:30. It's one of the highlights of my week as well. So we hope others will
Glad I opened that door.
Absolutely. Thanks for putting that plug in.
P.S., for the sake of history, that was Rabbi Korngold's idea.
Thank you, because no one around the table could exactly remember when the group started or who started it.
The second year of
Beautiful.
my tenure here.
Thank
so
you.
that would have been 2002. And he said that we get a great turnout for Shabbat morning. And he did the Prophets on Wall Street and downtown stuff, which got, a half a dozen people. He said, we need a weekday Torah study. And he was right. But my favorite was actually Monday nights because I taught a class in Hebrew for Hebrew. And was my idea. I started it. I committed myself to teach every week. And I loved, not only for myself, relearning and studying Hebrew, but I loved the fact that there were members of the synagogue who understood and appreciated and thirsted after that language. And it wasn't a lot of people, 6, 10 at its most, but for me it was the most gratifying teaching that I did.
Since the name of Rabbi Korngold has come up a couple of times, I just have to tell you one of the funniest stories in which he was central. My wife and I had entertained a lovely couple that we had met some years before from Lyon, in France. And one of the things that they wanted to do was to see that delicatessen that had the famous scene when Harry met Sally, right, right. I see that it's familiar to you all. They wanted to see where she sat when she wanted the same thing that other young woman had been served. And we took them down, and they said it was so different from France. In France, you get a great big hunk of bread with a tiny sliver of meat. But she, the lady of the family, got one of those rollicking corned beef sandwiches where it's 2 inches of corned beef or pastrami on a slice of rye. And it was really a lovely visit. We went sort of in the middle of the evening. The drive down, that drive down the East River Drive is absolutely gorgeous at night, and they loved the experience of going to Katz's. That next Friday night,
Nancy knows the story. I don't know what the story's going to be, but
she's laughing already. I used to walk him home, or he used to walk me home after services, and he had been to a play on Broadway, and he said, "Harvey, do you know that Katz's is closing? Katz's is closing." I said, "Wait, I was just there with friends." Of course, we were talking about a different cat, but then that was one of the final stories that he told on the pulpit, and it really brought down the house.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. So there's way more questions that we have time for. I think a lot about the role that Shaaray Tefila has played and can play with regards to serving its members, connecting people to each other, educating congregants, creating spiritual worship, and I'm privileged to be an inheritor of all that you've done in that regard. And I'm grateful. I think as well about the role that the congregation, I think, can play in making this city more just. You talked about the Soviet Jewry movement, and I'm sure there were other moments in which the congregation turned outward beyond these walls. And I'm wondering either whether you have a story of a time when the congregation did that, or what your view is on what role Shaaray Tefila can and should play turning outward, building partnerships with other peoples of faith in bringing justice to this city.
The task is right there before us. It rebounds all over the place every day, and I don't think that there are many moments in any day of our lives in which we don't think about what is happening in this country now. The coalition of religious groups against Trumpism is spreading all over the country. We have to be open to it. We have to initiate it. We have to be part of it. We cannot let those factors that put him into power and put what he represents into power go on. I have the feeling that if I came back as a rabbi out of retirement, I wouldn't last in the job for 2 weeks because I feel so strongly about this. And I feel that we have to be beacons not only of light but of forcefulness in not letting the power of this new presidency and administration and this great big phony constellation of the White House destroy our America. It is a wonderful country, a country that has given us a place in the sun. How much we owe to the United States of America and its democratic principles, and we have to stand up and fight for them. I don't mean with our fist, because that's not what I'm advocating, but there's so many ways in which we can resist and not cease to resist so that we don't lose what has been created. because what has been created is truly wonderful in the history of mankind.
With all due respect to my colleague, rhetoric is not enough. I hear rhetoric, and you do every day. Justice, great word. What does that mean? Equality, great word. What does that mean? People throw them around. They're universal values. We believe in them. What do they mean? What they mean is that when you're with another human being, you have a certain responsibility to act in a certain way. It doesn't mean a theological argument. It means human interaction. That's where it counts. And so, when Wednesday and Yom Kippur fell together, what did we do with our soup kitchen people who depend on us? To me, that was a crucial social justice moment. We did not want to devalue those people in any way. We didn't want them to feel shunted off to the side. We didn't want them to feel they were second-class citizens. We wanted them to have the same dignity and respect as when they walked through the front door. That was hard, but we did it. Yes, what we did was, because these rooms were filled, we made lunches, bagged, we gave them away. We fulfilled our obligation, and we tried to affirm the dignity of the poor as well as we could at that moment. That struggle to find the right answer was an important moment for me and my rabbinate grappling with conflicts. And parenthetically, neither major presidential candidate mentioned the word poverty during the entire campaign. Neither. Not even the Democrat. They never mentioned the word hunger during the entire campaign. 30+ million people in this country under the federal poverty line. 40+ million people every night go to bed not sure where their next meal is coming from. Not a word. The way we treat, as a society and as Jews, those in our midst who need our support, to me, that's where the rubber meets the road. Rhetoric doesn't touch me.
I believe we're at a crossroads, roads that I think very few, if any of us, have walked on before. The question before had to do with anti-Semitism. And as my professor, Michael Meyer, at Cincinnati's campus of HUC taught, Jewish history doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so when we look at rises in anti-Semitism in our country, and I preached on it a few years ago, and when we look at the anger that is just festering throughout America, good people, not bad people, but people who are fed up with the life that they've had or that hasn't changed over years. When we think of Billy Joel's Allentown having been written decades ago, and that the life for those individuals haven't changed, that the people, whatever side of the political divide we're on, most of the people aren't bad people. There are some bad elements there that have let loose and have been allowed to let loose, which is the scary piece. But they're good people. However, they may not be doing good things. And their anger leads to change and desires for change that aren't necessarily thought out, as we know. So when we talk about the city of New York and being downtown, part of a coalition down there are people at risk each day, whether it be the hunger that's rampant in our country, but there's also a hunger for freedom that seems to be diminishing, or its answer is being diminished in our country. And as congregations, I think we need to stand for what justice is and to march with our feet, as Abraham Joshua Heschel would say, but to really join forces. I was at a seminar last week from the CCAR on social media, and the person who was teaching was part of a PR firm, head of a PR firm. And he said, you know, we live in a world today where nobody's voice is heard without skepticism being thrown at it. He said, clergy have a different position. Clergy can still speak and people will listen, and listen somewhat differently. So that part of it is telling stories. So when I learned that when the Malibu Diner was opened last year, when the bombs went off in Chelsea, and the manager opened up and gave food to everybody who was there, first responders, the people who lived in the lighthouse for the blind, and just opened up the place. And I heard him, and I called, and I said, tell me, where's he from? Call the restaurant. He was a Mexican immigrant. At a time when discussion of walls was being hurled across the political sphere, here was somebody who had traction on pavement and said, let me help those who are helping others and those in need. So I think if we can engage in that kind of change and that kind of listening, and it's going to be hard, because we're not going to agree with every partner we have to walk the road with. And that's going to be a very hard thing as Jews when we're talking about especially Islamic issues, and who is our partner and who can we partner with and how far do we bend. But if we don't initiate the conversation, engage in the conversation, then I think the biggest fears that Rabbi Stein talked about in terms of our own identity and our own being at risk is going to rise to the top.
Thank you. So I'm pleased to say that our congregation is in the process of joining a citywide network called the Metro Industrial Areas Foundation, which is made up of 80 institutions of faith around the city. And we invite you to join us tomorrow afternoon in the South Bronx. So far, about 25 people have signed up to attend an assembly at 150th Street in the Bronx. Commissioner O'Neill will be speaking there. It will be a bilingual forum there, and so we're engaged actively in the work of making justice in this city, and I'm so glad that we are. I want to, as we draw to a close, I want to ask Rabbi Stein to retell a story that he shared with us upstairs about this particular artifact in the congregation.
Thank you. Many of you know this artifact, have seen it before. Early in my tenure here, one day, as she never, ever did, Nancy Schneider came bursting into my office. And she was cleaning out her closets, which was its own challenge up there in that old office. But she said, I found this. And she gave it to me, and it really looked interesting because it is actually a yod holding a yod. Which I thought was pretty cool. And I'm looking at it, and then I realized there's writing on it. And the writing says, presented by A.H. Jacobs to the congregation Gates of Prayer, June 25th, 5607, 1847. Our congregation was founded in 1845. I believe this is the oldest artifact we have. There's a pinky ring.
I've never seen a yod with bling on it, but this one does.
There's a pinky ring that was obviously missing whatever the original stone was. So I called Joel Marcus. It now has a diamond chip. When I retired, I took it with me with the intention that when my long-term successor was named and installed, that I would have the opportunity to present this to him, because Rabbi Mosbacher is now the keeper, the guardian of the history of this great congregation. And so I hope you'll come take a look. I also used it one Rosh Hashanah on the 350th anniversary of the Jews in America. So on behalf of all the rabbis who have preceded you, this yad is symbolic of the history of this great synagogue.
Thank you very much. So I sent some of these questions in advance, the ones I knew. I don't know if I can spring this one on you. Esther Ann Ash asked if we would sing El Norah Alilah. I don't know. We don't have the prayer book, so you'll have to come back on. El Norah Alilah, El Norah Alilah, Hamselanu Mechila.
Actually, we should have Rabbi Mosbacher do it as a prelude to Yom Kippur.
Can we thank these illustrious rabbis? If you'll be seated for just a moment.
I just want to say one thing. I refuse to be listed as the second oldest artifact.
We are grateful to all of you for today and for all of the days that have preceded this day in your service to this congregation and to the Jewish people. So we're grateful, and we hope that you'll come back often, and may there not be a new installation for a long time, but we hope that we'll have we hope that there'll be other opportunities for us to be together, to learn from each other, and to learn from you. So as we conclude this portion of our program, we're going to make Havdalah. I'm going to ask my colleagues to help with that, if that's okay. Do you mind to hold the candle? And that's for you. And then I'm going to grab my guitar once we have it lit. It's funny to do Havdalah at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a bright, sunny day, but it's dark. You know, we won't know that it's...
There are three stars out there somewhere.
I know. This is not that traditional, I'm sorry to say, Rabbi Tattelbaum. Please join with us. This has been a magical and beautiful Shabbat, and I want to say that I said to a couple of people, I know that lots of folks came last night for me, but it felt very much like you were there for you, for this community, for this congregation. And so what I should have said last night, but I didn't, so I'll say it here, is that this congregation is strong because of these rabbis and because of the lay leaders that partnered with them, and the lay leaders that we're privileged to work with now. We want to continue to fill these pews and expand the reach of this congregation. So I hope that as we go into this season, when folks in the congregation and the community and the larger community are thinking about, there's something at the corner of 79th and 2nd. I don't exactly know what it is. I get on the bus there, but I don't really know what it is and what it's about. If you have neighbors, which you do, who are not yet synagogued, if that's a word, if you have folks that you know who used to be members of this congregation and drifted away for whatever reason, if you're pleased about what's going on here, we hope, if you've been inspired by this weekend, we hope that you'll tell your unsynagogued friends about it, and folks who've drifted away for one reason or another, to invite them to come back without commitment. Have them come once. Have them come with you for whatever event that you're coming for, And together we'll continue to grow this congregation for the next decades to come. So please join with us for Havdalah. Yai lai la 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 lai 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 la 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 lai lai la 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 lai 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 la la lai lai la la lai 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 la la la. Yeah, you can put your arms around each other. Lai la 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 lai lai la 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 lai 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 la la lai lai la la lai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen borei peri hagafen lai lai la 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 lai 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 la la la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei besamim borei minei besamim borei minei besamim lai lai la 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 lai lai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'esh borei meorei ha'esh borei meorei ha'esh lai lai la 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 lai 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Hamavdil bein kodesh lechol Hamavdil bein kodesh lechol Hamavdil bein kodesh lechol Lai lai la 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 lai 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 la 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 lai lai la 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 lai 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 la la lai lai la la lai lai la 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 lai 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 la 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 lai la 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 lai 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 Eliyahu Hanavi Eliyahu Hatishbi Eliyahu 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 Agilati Bimhera beyameinu Yavo Eleinu Mashiach ben David Mashiach ben David Eliyahu Hanavi Eliyahu Hatishbi Eliyahu 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 Agiladi Shavuato 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 a good week, a week of peace, may gladness reign and joy increase. A good week, a week of peace, may gladness reign and joy increase. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
I want to thank Liz Sherman and the entire team who planned this evening. We're going through this way. And we invite you back tomorrow starting at 11 o'clock, I think, for a day of purpose. And we invite you for now to join us in the Davis Auditorium next door. Thank you all for being here.